Hello and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. As part of a comprehensive news analysis, today we'll be discussing 6 very important articles out of the Hindu newspaper. Good morning to all of you. It's been a very long time. It's good to be back. And before we start, we have multiple announcements for you which are quite important. Firstly, we are back with our popular initiatives which were very important for your preparation. So just before 2024, we have brought these back so that we can enhance your preparation generally. Thereafter, evaluation and giving mocks is also quite an important part of your preparation generally. So we have also launched that on this Sunday. We have the first test which is for free, and thereafter if you like the test, if you can engage more, you can also take the test series, and all the details are given in the description. Thereafter, we also have one more very important announcement that we have a workshop which is about syllabus, book list and preparation strategy to ACE UPSC CSE 2024 by Anubhav sir itself, and you can register for this again by the link given in the description. But more than this is a very generic type of discussion we have. If you want one-to-one counseling, because sometimes in UPSC preparation what you just need is basic idea and basic guidance. So if you need any form of one-to-one counseling, there's a Google form in the description box. You can fill that up. We'll be happy to call you and arrange everything for you generally. So the Google form which is given in the description box, please do fill that up if you want one-to-one counseling with regards to your preparation. Any question you have, you can ask us there. This is again an initiative we brought in just before 2024 for anybody who wants to prepare further or has been preparing. You can always fill this form and we will be happy to help you generally. So you can see just before the examination, we brought in everything back from the mocks itself to daily quiz to explain to big news and economy essentials itself. And I hope you will also fill this form up generally so that you can have a better experience, because UPSC is not just about studying, it's about smart study, and maybe that counseling session would be good for you. So thereafter, let's look at the 6 topics we discussed today. One, developing but quite interesting, that is the new criminal laws, which is CRPC, IPC, all have been changed. It has been introduced in the Lok Sabha. We'll go to the Raj Sabha, but we have to discuss it because it has a very interesting background to it. Thereafter, the outcomes of COP28. There are a lot of articles about this, but this one article gives you the basic outcomes which are there. Thereafter, something which is quite dangerous, reminds us of 2001 itself, the parliament breach of security. There's a very interesting article talking about what are the issues, what is the way forward with regards to that. So it gives a solution also. And then 3 simple but straightforward prelims oriented topics, with the Telegraph Act being repealed now. So you can see generally this time the agenda in the parliament is to repeal all the laws which have a colonial tinge to it. Then we have the Sahitya Akademi awards, important for culture, and generally awards and recognitions are becoming important in the examination. And thereafter, coming from Iceland, a volcano, a spectacle, but also reminds us of what the fury of God and nature can be in that regard. So with this, we'll enter the first article. As always, the structure is going to be with me standard, which is I'll give you the basic understanding first, what is the idea of the article, then we'll go into the nitty-gritty, which is the smaller details itself, and then we'll summarize. And I'll keep on summarizing as we go on further, and we'll have one major summarization after the 3 big articles, and then in the end also. So let's start with the first one, which is Lok Sabha replacing the 3 major acts in India, which is the Indian Penal Code 1860, Indian Evidence Act 1872, and the Code of Criminal Procedure, which is CRPC in 1898. So this 1860, 1872 and 1898 Act, these 3 are basically a relic of the past itself. So before we go into the basic essence, what are the new things which have been brought in, let's try to understand these 3 acts itself. So the Indian Penal Code was produced by the Law Commission, first Law Commission of India under T.B. Macaulay. And the fact of the matter is, be it IPC 1860, be it Indian Evidence Act 1872, and be it CRPC 1898, these acts were produced in a certain context. We are trying to replace them with new acts, which is Bharatiya Nyaya Second Sanhita Bill, BNSS, Bharatiya Sakshya Bill, which is the Sakshya means evidence, and thereafter Bharatiya Nagarik Suraksha Sanhita Bill, BNSSS. So we have these three bills which will replace these three. The fact is that these acts were produced in a certain context. Now herein comes the modern India static portion, wherein the fact of the matter is, be it the IPC, be it the Indian Evidence Act, or be it the CRPC, all have a colonial origin to them. These are not the only acts which basically have a colonial origin. If you go to the Indian Police Act, which still dictates the police 1861, this is also properly the colonial, and the sections itself also reflect colonial mentality. Thereafter, if you look at even the Civil Services Act, that also was produced the same period 1860-62, and again it has a very strong tinge of what we call as colonialism. Now what do I mean by colonial origin? This is a very important point. Now as we know, and if you've studied modern India you would know, that the purpose of these acts was not to rule India through democratic means, or justice was not something which was the emphasis of the British. As much as they will talk about rule of law, it was something which is the rule of the British itself. Bhagat Singh proved it in the whole Lahore conspiracy case itself. The things which were done in the Lahore conspiracy case, which comes through the Saunders murder itself and the legislative bombing, the fact of the matter remains is that he proved that the courts were nothing but doing what the British wanted to do. And Irwin, through using the emergency provision, through the approvers concept, through the fact that all approvers were tortured, multiple contexts we have throughout colonial history, throughout modern India, to tell us that these acts were not there for democratic means, they were basically for ruling India. And this is something where after 1947, the nature of state has changed. So very simply, these acts were produced in the 1860s and 1890s. That is not the period of proper nationalism, but nationalism was rising after 1885. Nationalism will take its main tinge after 1905, once the Swadeshi movement will happen. But being produced in this period, it is the Crown's responsibility, it is the Crown's attempt to basically systematize everything properly and produce these bills, these basic laws in order to effectively rule. Now, when you talk about colonial rule, it is about exploitation. It is about the rule of the British. It is about exceptionalism. The rule of law had a very big exception. If it undercut the British interest, it was not the rule of law itself. Now, these acts in that regard embody that concept. For example, the sedition clause itself, for example, to certain offences which were very specific to British rule itself. And if you look at the Indian Police Act also, it has a very strong influence, very strong emphasis on the fact that you need to protect the railways, you need to protect the channels of trade in that regard. The Civil Services Act also talks about the power of the civil servant when it comes to how he's ruling a district. Now, it's not about ruling, it's about democratic control. It's about community control. It's about decentralization of power. And in that context, these acts are quite significant because these three try to remove the colonial influence. And this is the quote which has come. It is a pure Indian law after removing all British imprints. That way, these bills which have been introduced are a very important direction we are taking with regards to our legislative or legal processes itself, because we are trying to now target areas where the British categorically made them either very vague or very draconian or problematic because it suited their rule. So what I'm trying to argue in this first section itself is that these laws need to change. It's not that one random day they have taken a call that we need to change these laws. All laws from CRPC to Evidence Act to Indian Penal Code, firstly, they're outdated. Secondly, we have amended them multiple times, but they've never come to the speed when it comes to the present context itself. And over and above that, when we talk about the colonial origin, it's about exploitation. So the fact of the matter is, yes, we need to change these laws. Now comes the question, what has changed? So what I've established to you first is, what is the need to change these laws? And therein we've established the fact that with the law commission itself being there, in a way initiated by the company itself in 1933. The fact is, in 1833 rather, and after 1858 itself, they changed the orientation, and that is the product of this. So the company initiated in 1833, and thereafter 1858 onwards, we see a change in orientation itself. So the first thing has been established, which is there's a need to change them. Now, what are the new aspects which have been brought in with regards to these bills? Now, obviously, you don't need to learn any of this. Do not learn that how many sections are there, what are the things, but just to give you a very small overview, that produced in 1860, 72, 1898, produced in the context of the company in 1833, the fact that it is something which brought everything together after the Crown took over in 1858 itself. These sections represent a past which was there, but we need to change it. So, for example, the CRPC now has more sections, from 484 to 531 sections. Further, 177 sections have been changed. 9 new sections have been added. 39 subsections have been included. 44 new explanations have been given. Timelines have been created in 35 sections. But again, code of criminal procedure is something which doesn't really impact you and me until unless it is about going to the legal court and what the judges and the lawyers have to follow. This is something which actually impacts us, which is IPC and the Indian Evidence Act. IPC, 31 new offences have been added. There is an increase in the imprisonment period of 41 offences. And penalty has been heightened 82. Again, I told you, don't need to learn this. I'm just trying to give you an overview how extensive this is. And when it comes to the Evidence Act itself, 170 sections have been as compared to 167 previously, and 2 new sections have been added. And Evidence Act is very, very important because Evidence Act decides what will be permissible in court itself. So, very extensive changes has been happening for the past 3 years. There have been multiple stakeholders which have been taken together. The fact is that every section has been very meticulously checked. Does it have or does it have any relevance today or not? What was the purpose of that section itself? But there are certain highlights of the new bill which has been introduced. We can't discuss everything because once it becomes law, it has to go to the Raga Sabha. And let's see if it is passed in the same original form as introduced in the Lok Sabha itself. That is something we have to see. But as of right now, there are 6 very interesting things which are coming out. I've established to you first thing, which is what is the origin of these laws. And I've told you that British colonial law was never about rule of law. It was always about exceptionalism. It was always about the British, and produced throughout this period from 1833 to 1898. The simple straightforward point is that the laws embody a certain exploitative nature and a colonial past. This is the first thing. Second thing, there's an extensive change we've done. And now what we're trying to establish here is the fact that what are the key things which we can see, and let us see if they go forward in that sense or not. So there are key highlights or key points which we can understand from here. Is first a very interesting thing, that mob lynching and hate crimes, these used to be subsections or implied offences under the IPC. They've now been made proper offences, and the punishment is life imprisonment to capital punishment, which is death. And the minister has argued that when it comes to the death sentence, these are the offences for which basically death sentence makes a lot of sense. Because any form of communalistic vibe, which is this vibe of Hindu-Muslim violence, wherever there is this old colonial understanding of us dividing ourselves over different forms of what we call as identities, it is true that when it comes to mob lynching and hate crimes, be it caste-based, varna-based, religion, or any form of what we call as axis of division, it should be imprisonment and death. It should be. Because there has to be a certain fear which should be there in the people, that they should realize that when it comes to dividing people on certain axes and then also creating example of people, this is something which is problematic. And therefore, mob lynching and hate crimes, imprisonment to death sentence, in a way creates a deterrence. We'll see what happens further, but this is now a proper crime in that regard, which is something significant. This was not something which the British, as it is, wanted separate electorates. They liked the communistic vibe itself. They wanted to divide India, divide and rule, further go and divide. But the fact of the matter remains is mob lynching and hate crimes, now life imprisonment and capital punishment is a proper subsection under it. Thereafter, what we see is the concept of zero FIR. Now, zero FIRs have existed previously also. It's not something new. Zero FIR concept is very simple. I belong to Delhi and I am traveling in, for example, Chennai. Now, the same could be true vice versa, which is from Chennai to Delhi, Delhi to Chennai. And some offense happens in Delhi or some offense happens in Chennai. Now, obviously, you would like to lodge the complaint of that in Delhi or in Chennai, but you would also like it to be in your home state. For example, if you're from Delhi, you would want it to be in Delhi itself, because then you have more accessibility to the police station. Or, for example, you lost everything in Delhi or in Chennai and you have no option but to go to to certain police station in Delhi, Parliament Street, or to Chennai. Now, the concept of zero FIR is very simple. That there is no jurisdiction when it comes to zero FIR. Because, for example, if I lose my wallet, for example, at Central Secretariat, and I realize that by, for example, Azadpur, the fact is Azadpur police station will say that you did not lose it here. You lost it at Central Secretariat. So go and lodge a complaint in the Central Secretariat police station and then we will go for further investigation. This is called police station jurisdictions. Generally, jurisdiction matters. Interstate jurisdiction, or the fact of the matter remains, the IO or the investigation will also happen in the same way. The jurisdiction matters. Zero FIR concept is very simple. That jurisdiction does not matter. Wherever you are, whatever the offense is, just go and lodge a complaint and the FIR will be done under zero FIR, and thereafter it is the responsibility of the police to then send it to the requisite and the relevant police station. This is a very, very important concept which has now been made universal. Zero FIRs used to happen, for example, in most of, when it comes to women offences, when it comes to any form of heinous crime, mostly zero FIRs were there. But now zero FIR has been made more open, wherein you really don't need to figure out which police station I need to go to for this offence or that offence. So the interstate and the intrastate also. If I am in one section of the city and there's an offence which has happened with me in the other section, it's not that I need to go to that same police station. No, I can be at any police station and therefore I can just lodge a zero FIR. This is something quite significant. Zero FIRs used to happen. In multiple cases they have been used, but the police used to use it. Now you can opt to say that I want to do a zero FIR. Zero FIR, this has happened with me. Now you figure it out which police station it should go to. So, if you look at it, certain new very interesting things have been introduced. So, we have a proper crime, mob lynching and hate crime, and thereafter zero FIRs. Then every district will have a director of prosecution who will give advisory to the police on how to proceed on certain investigations. This is again very quite interesting that there's a legal cell in every police station, like legal cell in mostly in every department of police. But having a director of prosecution means that they have proper legal redressal also. If the police wants to figure something out or the victim wants to figure something out, there's a director of prosecution. He will tell you how to proceed, what is the investigation, and this is more for the police in that sense. Last but not the least, there are certain timelines which have been put in. timelines have been put in for FIRs, meaning if an FIR is lodged, in how much time it has to be then investigated, when will be the IO, which is investigating officer, will be allocated. Now, again, as I said, this is a developing story. We have to wait another 10 to 15 days to get a proper article on this. But as I said, multiple interesting concepts are coming through. So from hate crime and lynching becoming a proper separate offense to zero FIR lodging, which is now anywhere and everywhere. It is not something which you have to do. The police station has to decide in 24 hours where it has to be sent. Thereafter, we have having a proper director of prosecution to the FIR. Once it's registered, within 3 days after receiving the complaint, it has to be registered. You give in a complaint, FIR has to be done in within 3 days. Thereafter, in cases of 7 to 14 days imprisonment, preliminary inquiry needs to be done within 14 days, and search and seizure within 24 hours. Now again, this is something which is of no purpose to you. You don't have to give a law exam, you have to give UPSC. So simple point is, you don't have to get caught up in the details, just have to understand that there is a very important bill. These 3 important bills are going to be passed from the Rajya Sabha, and in that sense quite important, generally quite important, because it removes the colonial tinge. So before I move on to the COP article, let's try to understand what we've understood in this article generally. First, that we've understood the fact that it is problematic, it has colonial origin, produced throughout the colonial period. Most of the things produced in the colonial period do not have the right institutional mechanism, and is one of the challenges which we do in post-independence also, which is institutional challenges. And the institutional challenge is the fact that these are colonial in origin, first thing. Second thing which we have to see is the fact that what is the intention. And the intention is to remove the colonial tinge and bring in the new relevant sections which are relevant for today's world in that regard. Third is key pointers which are coming out. Zero FIR, hate crimes becoming a proper offense, to director of prosecutions, to a timeline where the police is bound to do something, is something quite important. There are other aspects also, EFIR and all, but they were not properly explained in the bill until unless you see the raw bill itself. We will wait for 2-3 more days. We'll have a proper article for sure on this, and we'll again discuss this through that perspective, where what are the technological things which have been added in this bill as more and more media coverage happens of this bill generally. So I hope that you understand the purpose of the discussion, which is origin, what are the sections, what was the need. Thereafter, let's move to something which is a standard perennial topic in GS paper 3, which is the Conference of Parties, or what we call UNFCCC. The fact of the matter remains, this is the only body which is talking about climate change, global warming, and since Paris Agreement, it has become more and more significant also. So the 28th session happened in Dubai this year, and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, Conference of Parties has happened. Now again, there are certain things we need to understand generally. Again, I'll go into the nitty-gritty later. Let's try to understand the outcomes in a very simple, straightforward way, the way you have to remember for the examination. So let's try to understand it. When we talk about COP28, there are certain outcomes, and these outcomes need to be known to you, because you would have to write it in the mains paper. You also would have to know it for prelims. So both for prelims and mains, you should know what are the outcomes. Now the first outcome is the operationalization of what is called as loss and damage fund. Now basically this is again a very first world thing, which is all developed countries basically dictating us everything. Loss and damage fund, the concept is that whatever irreplaceable and reversible damage has happened due to climate change and global warming, there's a fund for that. It has now been operationalized. The developed countries had put in a little bit of money into this, and now the least developed countries and the, for example, Polynesian countries, which are very, very vulnerable to Valu and all, very vulnerable to climate change, they can use this to mitigate it. But again, pledged amount is very big, and the money which has been given is very small. And this is a pattern which you will see generally, which is that they will try to do big things, very big ideas will be pushed, but nothing really will come out as the outcome. So the first is operationalization of the loss and damage fund. Again, something which they are talking about. Money is there, but it has not reached the level it should be, only has been operationalized. This had been decided in COP 27 itself. It has now been operationalized in Dubai. Now, second outcome is the concept of GST, not RGST. It is called Global Stock Take or Global Stock Taking, which is are the efforts we are putting in for green energy and green technologies having any impact or not. This is called either cumulatively or as individuals, what is the impact of our efforts. This is called the global stock taking. Thereafter, within this, certain countries have pledged that fossil fuel consumption they will reduce, and three times more we will have what we call as a renewable energy. Thereafter, again, big idea, what will happen on the ground is a separate story altogether. Then, fourth, a very standard perennial issue since Paris itself, green finance and funding. Again, the developed countries agreeing with the common but differentiated responsibilities have agreed to contribute something, but the contribution should have been $100 billion a year, which could be used by developing countries to transition to green technologies very quickly. But when I'll show you the amount which they've given, they're basically throwing pennies when we need thousands of dollars. And therefore, green finance remains a problem itself. Now, these are the outcomes. Problem remain, which is green finance, the concept of developed countries not taking everything very seriously, and the nuclear power will be increased, renewable energy will be increased, all that is fine. But the fact of the matter remains is that when it comes to the real pledge of the developed countries, it is all quite superficial that way. Now, what was India's take of this whole conference? And India quite candidly stayed away from two major declarations. One is called the UAE Declaration. And the UAE Declaration is about reducing carbon footprint, which is the carbon emissions in healthcare. Here, India did not become a part of this declaration because India said that if we become part of this declaration, our healthcare sector is already developing. Rural healthcare will take a hit if we pledge to reduce carbon emissions. We are right now struggling to even go last mile connectivity is a problem. You want us to go hi-fi and very, very high technology. That is not our priority right now. First, giving universal healthcare is very, very important. Thereafter, we'll see the footprint. So here, India actually strategically stayed away quite well that way. Thereafter, the other thing from which India stayed away is called Global Methane Pledge. Again, India remained very aloof to this methane pledge. And the technical definition or the technical argument we gave was, see, methane stays in the atmosphere for lower time, though it has higher potency. We said methane is not our priority. Our priority is carbon emissions. But the bigger issue is that methane emissions from agriculture is quite high. And if we do go into global methane pledge, we would then have to do something about our agricultural methane emission, which makes no sense again because agriculture, 46 to 47% of the population on it, makes no sense. So if you look at it, we have again standard every year, big declarations are happening. On the ground, nothing has happened. this has been operationalized, sure. Global stock take has been taken, but that report will take time. Fossil fuel, everybody says we will reduce, we will increase renewable. That's the obvious thing you will do. And green finance remains a problem generally. And UAE declaration and global methane pledge are two pledges which were taken. India did not become a part of either. So this is the basic idea of this article, the basic gist of that article. Now we can go into the nitty-gritty and we can understand the smaller points. Again, don't have to learn them, just have to know them generally. So the first outcome is the loss and damage fund, which is to finance consequences which are irreversible when it comes to climate change itself for mitigation and avoiding adaptation. And they now added some money into it, $790 million, and few nations, despite requiring close to $100 billion or more for something like this, close to $400 billion a year. The lowest and the most interesting thing is US used to contribute quite big into these things, but US only contributed $17.5 million. That was the biggest emitter, the biggest carbon footprint. A meager $790 million was actually pledged for. So as I told you again, all these are big funders. Nothing really is happening on the ground. And when it comes to climate change, as it is, the developed countries have made a mockery out of it. Thereafter, second, global stocktake will now be taken, wherein enable countries and other stakeholders to collectively check if they're making progress with regards to Paris goals. And I'll tell you the progress. We have already reached 1.1 degrees Celsius. We only have 0.4 degrees Celsius leverage. They said over 1.5 degrees Celsius, we go into a phase in which the earth will keep on heating till 2 to 3 degrees Celsius. And we've already reached 1.1. So the IPCC has been screaming on the top of the voice that we've already reached 1.1. They still need to take a global stocktake. So are we helping, are we not? 0.4 degrees Celsius is our basic legroom. Thereafter, certain countries have said that we'll triple our renewable energy, we will bring in more fossil fuel, we'll reduce fossil fuel, we'll bring in more nuclear capacity. Again, sounds very good. Dubai conference, money wasted, nothing really happened. Thereafter, third is the biggest issue, which is green finance. When we talk about green finance, there is no real headway here. No real headway. Only $3.5 billion was actually added to the Green Climate Fund, which has now been there for at least 5 to 6 years. And additional $188 million was again pledged for the Adaptation Fund. However, they're talking about private sector role, they're talking about people having a grant-oriented understanding. But again, this should have been $100 billion a year for the past 5 years. So it should have been close to $500 billion right now. But it is not even close to that. They are pushing again not even 3% of the total amount year on year. And this is all totally a developed country responsibility. So their priorities, when they will start to sink, they will actually talk about it. When it comes to India, we know that there is a UAE declaration which is for recognizing growing health impacts of climate change and climate change reduction of pollution, lowering cost of healthcare. This lowering cost of healthcare means carbon footprint should go down and carbon emission should go down. This declaration, 123 countries were there, but India did not become a part of it because it would mean that it would have to reduce emissions in the health sector, and that too for cooling, for example, vaccines, for example, the whole vaccine set which needs a refrigeration, they would say that reduce the carbon footprint. India needs right now universal healthcare for everybody, and India very categorically and very well stayed away from this. The second one was the global methane pledge. Herein again, it was about reducing methane emissions from agriculture, waste, gas sector. Here again, India said we don't really care about methane right now. CO2 is our main focus. But again, as I told you, because agricultural methane has to be changed, agricultural methane from livestock and agriculture generally from paddy farming is quite high. So we actually could not have signed this because it would have then backfired on us generally. So when we talk about the conclusion, step forwards have been made. Sure, the loss and the damage metrics has gone forward. Fund disbursement and management is still there. But again, no concrete things. COPs have now just become a drama. happening every year with no real consequence in that regard. So before we move on to the third article, we've done two. First, we discussed the three new bills which have been introduced to the Lok Sabha, the need for them, the basic sections, from zero FIR to the concept of what we call as director of prosecution, to now hate crimes becoming a proper offense. And the second article talks about the outcomes. Here, as I told you, the outcome is quite superficial. Operationalization of loss and damage, global stock take, fossil fuel consumption, which is, they will reduce it 3 times increase, green financing, UAE declaration, India did not sign it, global methane pledge, India did not sign it. This is what you actually have to remember generally. Now, before we move on to the third article, just a reminder, because a lot of you joined in the past half an hour, remember that we are starting one-to-one online counseling for students who want to understand what is UPSC, want to give UPSC, and generally from current affairs to static, everything. There's a Google form link in the description box. You should fill it up if you want any form of guidance generally. Okay, with this, we move to something which was quite dramatic. We all were greeted to, or in a horror, we saw people entering the new parliament building and thereafter entering into the Lok Sabha itself and opening the smoke canisters inside it. Now the people involved quote Bhagat Singh. They talk about the central administrative bombing. They talk about how they wanted to reenact it. I would really recommend those people to not take from their mouth the name of Bhagat Singh, because what Bhagat Singh was doing was something totally different, something much greater for the nation. And in a colonial era, he had very different aims. He was not there to just make a random point about unemployment and give dissent. He was there to show that the British were here to rule and making the mockery of the legislative process and the judiciary itself. And therefore, there is no parallels here. In no way there's any parallels. Bhagat Singh is a very, very important personality, very towering leader, very relevant till today. And these people have misinterpreted what they were doing and have come up with this basic idea that we are going to reenact it and we will prove a point. In a democratic system, that is not the way you go forward. And that too, just close to the anniversary of a major horror in which a lot of people died, which is the Parliament attack of 2001, you should never try to enact these things. Because you can always have other ways of making your point, but breaching the parliament security is giving people ideas. In a way, they've done service to the nation also, because they've shown us the major shortfalls which are there when it comes to parliamentary security. But again, as I told you, that they deserve to be under UAPA, and actually, they should never quote Bhagat Singh in what he did and what they are doing. Literally. By just adding Azad to your name, you don't become Chandrasekhar Azad. That's the basic point. You really don't become that. And those personalities, those revolutionaries were at a different level altogether. They were fighting against a colonial rule which had been there for close to 200 years. And there is no parallels between the Republic of India and the colonial rule of what we saw. So when we talk about the historical context, being a student of history, being a professor of history itself, the fact is they really are not even 0.01% of what they could have been and what these leaders were. So really quoting Bhagat Singh does no service to them generally. Second thing is, now we have seen a major breach. We have seen that parliamentary security has a lot of issues, and in a way we are still stuck up with a lot of old technology. Now this article comes from a former IPS officer also, and he was also Special Director of Intelligence Bureau. He is also right now the chairman of a central he's basically having a NGO, and he was also a former Chief Information Commissioner. That is why this article becomes important. Yashovardhan Azad, very, very important personality that way. His article becomes important because it identifies multiple things for us. Now, as I told you, what they did is unjustifiable, but has pointed out something to us. that there are major issues when it comes to parliamentary security. Now, what can we learn out of it? How do we move forward? And how can we avoid it is something which is quite significant. Now here, the first point is there are lapses at 3 levels. One is called the DFMD, which is door framed metal detector, which you would have seen these type of DFMDs when you go to any metro station or any form of makes a noise when you cross it. This is called a DFMD. Now DFMDs basically door framed metal detectors detect metal, and more or less there's a lot of security theater when it comes to a lot of places, because it's just there to show that we are doing DFMD, which is metal detection. Now, the first breach is here. How did they undercut it? They undercut it by using plastic. So they used plastic, that whole canister in which the gas was a plastic canister. So therefore, it could not be detected by either a handheld metal detector or a DFMD itself. First. Second major issue which we see is that we never checked, and in that sense, which is significant also and in a way also problematic, never were in the parliamentary security shoes checked. In the sense, never were you asked to open your shoes, and never they checked what was inside your shoe. And it's a very standard thing which in America and Europe they are paranoid over these things, and everything is basically taken off. But here we did not do it, the temple of Indian democracy, and we never checked the shoes of the people entering. And therefore, what they did was they kept the canister in their shoes, and they knew that they will never be checked with regards to shoes itself. Second is the breach, and the major thing is that even when there is frisking and searching, we did not understand that if you have something in your shoe, you will walk in a different way. So that could have been picked up. There are actually people who are very specialist of body language. Third is that when he actually went into the hall, when the person, I'll not take their name because that only glorifies them and they don't deserve that. When they came into the hall itself, none of the marshals were able to charge, and it were the MPs, actually MPs who surrounded that person and beat him up and gave it to the police people or to the security people, wherein it was the present MPs who did it. Now imagine the situation. Fortunately, on that day, the Prime Minister was not there in that hall. And fortunately, these were just random teenagers who were frustrated by their journey, trying to prove a point. That too, very insignificant, and have only made a mockery of our own journey, our own struggles. Now, what if it was actually a terrorist organization? What if the Prime Minister was there that day? If the Prime Minister would have been there, the SPG would have taken force in that regard, the Special Protection Force. SPG protocols change, the basic idea changes. But the fact of the matter remains, if there were breaches that day, it could have happened that day also. So the fact is, we have somehow come out of this with no real consequence other than just getting cognizant about what happened that day. So we now have to learn from this. And what are the things which we need to actually, or what are the red flags which came out? First thing is institutional. See, the Joint Secretary Security of Parliament has not been appointed. The two chiefs, CRPF and CISF, who are responsible for Sansad security, again vacant. And it was only the ITBP, which is Indo-Tibetan Border Police, which was responsible for checking that day, security that day. So firstly, you have no heads of security when it comes to Parliament security itself, new Parliament, which is quite problematic. This is the first red flag. Second red flag is that if the Americans and if the Europeans can have what are called backscatter scanners and what we call as smaller millimeter wave scanners, which can basically take out plastic also, which can detect plastic or any other substance. Why can't we have it in the most important building for the Republic of India, which is the Parliament? Why are we still using those outdated standard metal detector? And that too, now everybody's gone forward and understood that a metal detector will take metals. It will take even your belt buckle. So the point is, why are we still using outdated technology? This is the second issue. Third issue is that if there was technology available, if it was available, and it is not very expensive, doesn't really matter, it is the parliament. There is Sansad security and there's MHA. Either the Sansad security, which is the parliament security, had to take a call, or the MHA had to take a call. MHA mostly takes a call on security. It is mostly the authority which gives this equipment to them. Now, why did they not take a call? How is that when it comes to technology, it is in the parliament only we have the old outdated concept itself. So the point is, was it a secretariat failure from the Sansad Bhavan? Was it a failure of the MHA itself? So the third thing which we see is that there's a gap, there's a loop, there's a lacuna, which is a gap in which they are not taking decisions the way they should. So when we talk about scanners, when we talk about security heads, these are very standard things which could have been in place. And therefore, the way forward becomes that we have to either give the security to SPG and they bring in the standard protocols, which is also not possible because SPG responsibility is much bigger and they have much problem at what we call as much greater responsibility. So it cannot be that parliamentary security should be given to SPG. If SPG has to be given, expand the SPG. The Secretary of Security, the Cabinet Secretary, everybody should be there. Specifically, Head of Security, Joint Secretary Security should be there. This is a very standard thing. A committee comprising of 5 MPs has been formed, which will now check why is that only the ITBP was there, why not the CISF or the CRPF. Second thing is that we need to also have periodic audits. These are called security audits. You audit the security that are there vulnerabilities or not. This is something which is again very significant, which has to be done. Third is that the MPs need to cooperate with the security agencies when it comes to nominating people, because these people came on the invitation of MPs. Standard thing which used to happen and still happens, but now because there will be more protocol, but there are certain takeaways out of this. Now, before we go to the Prelims Bytes section, very small section, straightforward section, we need to remember 3 things. We've discussed 3 main articles right now. The first one, we understood the 3 bills which have been introduced, which want to remove or replace the IPC, the CRPC, and the Indian Evidence Act. And the fact is, all 3 have colonial origin. There's a need for that. Here, 0 FIR anywhere, the timeline for FIRs itself, and the aspect related to Director of Prosecution and hate crimes becoming a proper section itself is quite significant. We will see this will keep on developing further. Second, we saw loss and damage fund getting operationalized for COP. The fact with regards to climate finance, again, some funda was given, but nothing really happened. Further, we have the idea of global stock take. Is there an impact of what we are doing? And fossil fuel reduction, renewable energy increase. UAE declaration, India stayed away because healthcare is something which is important to India right now. And the global methane pledge also India stayed away because methane in agriculture is a very major emitter. We are a major emitter in that regard, but the footprint is still quite small. But the fact is we cannot pledge for methane right now. That would slow our development down. And the third article we saw was parliamentary security and the idea of that whole concept itself. Very simply, we know that DFMDs did not work. Frisking is not correct. Only ITBP was there. All heads of securities were not there. And why are we using outdated technology? And coming from a very important personality who was linked to all these institutions previously, the article gives you a headway, which is better security. Either SPG takes over or we have at least the institutions there. New technology should be used. And the MPs have to also do a screening of the people they are nominating, because you never know who has what ulterior motive. Thereafter, we go to Prelims Byte here. This is basically prelims oriented. We don't have to go into a lot of detail. Basic points, I'll tell you what you have to remember, and then we'll take the mains questions. So first is that the Telecom Bill 2023 has replaced a 140-year-old Telegraph Act. Again, Dalhousie's period introduced as a way of helping the railways. If you have railways, you need telegraph itself. Now herein, there are certain very interesting sections. Again, let's see how it properly comes out. It has only been passed from the Lok Sabha. It says that it wants to reform and simplify regulatory and licensing regime. And the government, very significantly now, can temporarily take control of the telecom services in the interest of national security and provide a non-auction route for allocation of spectrum, which is also important because auctioning of spectrum has become problematic in the overall context itself. When we talk about the Telecom Bill 2023, the mechanism also gives right of way, which is that if it is on public or private land, if that infrastructure needs to be developed, the person has to sell that land in that regard. And in order to protect users such as the specific messages or creation of a do not disturb register, now these things have to be done properly by the telecom industry itself. And authorization from the central government to establish new networks will also be provided, and radio equipment in certain areas which are sensitive. So again, you can see it's all trying to simplify it. This act itself made no sense at this point of time. So one only problematic aspect is this one, that this can be misused by governments, but the fact is national security comes first, and the government is trying to make it easier for it to take control of telecom services, specifically internet. Second is something relevant for art and culture. Art and culture, we do the Sahitya Akademi, and the Sahitya Akademi has just recently announced the awards given by it in recognition of the 24 languages which come under it. Remember, Sahitya Akademi has a very interesting peculiarity, 22 languages under 8th schedule. It recognizes 24. English and Rajasthani are two languages which are not part of the 8th schedule itself, 22 languages. It gives two more recognitions. So again, I'll give you the names of these personalities, will remain relevant till prelims. So you have Tamil author Rajashekharan, Telugu writer T.P. Shastri, Malayalam writer E.V. Ramakrishnan, who have been named as the Sahitya Akademi Award winners for 2023. 9 books on poetry, again don't learn this, just to give you an overview. 5 short story collections, 3 essays, 1 literary study have won the award itself. In the English language category, N.S. Gaur has been selected for a novel Requiem in Raga Janki, and in Hindi it is Sanjeev who has been named for his Mujhe Pehchano. Now the awards are obviously recommended for the 24 languages as approved by the executive board of the academy itself. You have to have published in the last 5 years, and therefore the Sahitya Akademi recognizes the last 5 years published books for this award generally. Now the fact is all of these personalities from Rajashekharan to Mr. Shastri to what we call Lakshmisha Topadi, the awards give recognition to their very important creative mechanism, and in that sense it till today remains a very, very important mechanism of honoring and recognizing intangible cultural contributions of authors and writers. Again, don't learn each and every name. Just remember this is the institutional mechanism. The peculiarity is 24 languages. Further, we also need to know last 5 years, immediately 5 years preceding to the year you gave the award. So from 2017 to 2021, that is the period in between the award can be taken for. So please remember this point, very, very important, institutional mechanism. This is the only point which you have to remember. Other than that, the names change according to your year of giving the examination. Last is something which was going to develop itself. We had seen that in Iceland, there were multiple earthquakes happening, close to 400 plus earthquakes. And the fact was that is an indication of a volcanic eruption. And finally, that volcanic eruption has happened on 18 December, 4 kilometers of a small town called Gridavik. In the what we call Icelandic Meteorological Office has told us this. The volcanic range in what is called the Requiem Peninsula, 50 kilometers away from the capital itself. Now a very famous Blue Lagoon geothermal spa has been closed, and this was in the news generally. So when it comes to places in news, this is important for you, which is the volcanic eruption in Iceland with regards to something which we knew already because of the number of earthquakes which happened generally. Thereafter, I hope that the 6 articles we discussed is totally clear. one related to the 3 bills, one related to what we call as the COP28 itself. Then we discuss the issues related to the 3 what we call as the bills, the fact that there is a Telegraph Bill which is going out of the picture itself, then Iceland and a volcano, and thereafter Sahitya Akademi awards, and the 3 basic articles dealing with 3 basic ideas: parliamentary security, the idea of what we call as COP28, and the 3 old acts being replaced now. So let's look at the mains question, and these are based on what we've discussed. Discuss the outcome of COP28. Discuss the reasons for India to not engage with some of the creed declarations. It's a very interesting question. So you have to discuss the UAE declaration and global methane pledge. The breach of parliamentary security produces multiple questions that need urgent answers. Comment. This is an internal security question. You can see it in internal security. You can see it in GS paper 2 also. GS paper 2 and 3 both. So with this, I would like to end the session. But before I end, just a reminder, please remember that there is a Google form in the description box. It is there for any form of one-to-one counseling for UPSC. If you have any doubt, any question, just fill that form up and we will connect with you and make sure that your dream to become an IAS officer is successful. Thank you. I will see you tomorrow with another set of issues from the next paper of Hindu. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.